Today we'll be talking about how to design good. I'm not changing this to well. It's how to design good. So like design is always a really tricky thing to have, and it's a really important thing to have in your applications and like what you're going to be making. So some of the things here will be like very important to keep in mind at least. So when you're designing something, like you're sitting there, you're thinking maybe like you're brainstorming ideas for milestone 0 or milestone 1, and you come up with like a crazy idea, right? And you think, okay, let's build a car, and you have this like perfect image of a car in your mind. And then you sit down on your terminal, you like code a bunch of stuff, you open VS Code, right? You work on it for like a couple of weeks, and you have something like this. And yes, it's like it is a car. It has 4 wheels. It has the body of the car, but maybe like the tires don't really work that well. Maybe the engine's a little rusty. It's a little broken. Maybe some of the windshield wipers like don't exist. I don't know, but it's a car. The thing is it's not what you had in mind originally, and people don't use it the same way. It's just not as usable. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And yeah, you're sad because the car doesn't work. So the main thing is when you're designing things, for your applications, for your websites, you want to think from the user's perspective. That's the most important thing. So you want to ask questions like, what do I want to see on this website? What features make sense, right? How should the flow of the website go, and like a lot of other things that we'll get into. So this is what we generally refer to as the user experience and the user interface, which you might commonly see abbreviated as UX and UI. And there's like a ton of stuff out there on like describing how the user interface and user experience works. And there's all sorts of this like, various diagrams and whatnot that aren't really that helpful, honestly. And so we'll just give you like a couple sort of things to start thinking about, so you can consider like, how might I go about, designing a user interface and like, optimizing for the user experience. So here are a couple of things to consider. So first of all, the aesthetics. So you want to think about like the font formatting, like the positioning of elements on your page, right? Is the font too readable? Is it too small or too large? I mean, these things seem like pretty obvious, but it's actually kind of surprising how many websites out there that just don't really follow these at all. Also, you might consider things like, does your font give the website the right feel? And like what that means is, if you look at something like this, dear Jimmy, you are invited to my super awesome bouncy castle birthday party, and this is in Times New Roman. It like just looks awkward because Times New Roman is a very, very standard, it's very like rigid. It's like a very, structured font. Whereas if you have something like this, where you have, dear James Jamley, it is with my deepest regret that I write to inform you that you have, their test results indicate that you do indeed have COVID, Dr. Timothy Timley. And this is in Comic Sans. It just doesn't make sense, right? It just looks wrong on the page. So you want to these are extreme examples, but like, if something like this showed up, I would probably reconsider getting in, So the sort of like idea is that you want to choose fonts that, fit the theme of your website, that like help convey that same message and don't collide with it. All right, let's talk about visuals. So visuals are one of the most important things you can have on your website, obviously, because that's what the user is seeing, and that's most of the experience. So things like, there's an example right here. Just like if you remove that sort of background where there's this like big wide scenery of like just outdoors nature, I think that would take away a lot from like the website itself. Like I think there's like that single image helps like convey the message like so much more than any of the words on the page. And like something like Discord, a lot of you might have used. It has like this sort of like pop feel with like, this sort of neon purple looking background. There's like some graphics on the side, but, even without them, just the color choice in the font and like just a couple little sparkles in the background, I think helps convey that sort of energetic, like cool-ish, like theme for Discord. All right, now let's talk about audio. So, yeah. So audio is considered like generally, and at least in Web Lab, it's considered probably like an extra feature that you probably won't get around to until like later on in the stage, unless like your website is directly focused on something like that. But having just like nice sound effects, just a couple, or like just one ambient background track, and all of these you can find on Google just like with a couple searches. So just having a little bit of this could really help like sell the experience like so much more. Like if you imagine like a lightsaber duel in Star Wars without any of the lightsaber sounds, it just looks really weird. And also like these sort of lightsaber sounds are so iconic to the franchise of Star Wars that, that sound in itself, like you can just, like, if I just tell you, like, what does a lightsaber sound like, you can probably just hear it in your head right now. So something like that just makes, the story so much more convincing. And I think that is something that like audio can really do. And yeah, so, if you want to find like good sound effects or just some ambient track, you can just go on Google and search up like, I don't know, free sound effects or like, peaceful background music or like whatever kind of background music you want. And there'll be like hundreds and thousands of different tracks to choose from. Like you will find them, and like non-copyrighted ones as well. All right, now like the next main section is going to be styling and theming. So does your website have a consistent theme? Does it fit the idea of like your website? Like what are you trying to accomplish? And does it look the way that does it look that way? So like, I'll take an example from Vincent. Here's Ant Design's home website. It has this like, animated little button on the eye where you hover over the home page. And here are a couple of if you scroll down, you see something like this. And so like, what does this kind of invoke in the user? Well, it looks, professional, it looks clean, kind of creative. And there's like a sort of design aspect too. And how does it do that? Well, it uses these like sort of clean, simple font. It has this like block organization. There's like colors, but there's like a variety of different like, pretty pleasing colors to the eye. And it has this sort of uniformity across, but like there's still a lot of like, cool little icons and stuff. So just like gives this overall sense of professionalism and just like a sort of good design product. Maybe something like this, right? This looks, very cool, very futuristic, almost like a little dark and gritty, like almost cyberpunk-like. And how does it do that? Well, it has this like dark background. There's like silhouettes. There's this. I mean, you actually can't see it in this, but like the homepage is actually animated with a sort of glitch effect, and all the features are hidden down below. And you can even see like the font is like very thin, very angular. So that's kind of all contributes to this sort of overall experience. Even something like this, Pusheen.com. I mean, this is like cute, it's fun, it's friendly, it's accessible to everyone, right? How does it do that? Well, there are these big, rounded letters, right? There's like the block rounded letters with the Hello Kitty. There's like sort of cursive, like rounded letters for the Pusheen, like this trademark logo, whatever itself, right? And there's a lot of just like bright pink. Everything's like very clear, and it's just very, just rounded in a sense. So this is how like these different websites build their theme using the various elements on their page. Okay, now let's talk about the website's flow. So does their website have a flow on how the user should be using the website? Like when they first load into the homepage, should it be clear like what they should be doing? And a quick example is like Facebook. So if you open the homepage of Facebook, you'll see the sort of core element is this infinite scrolling feed. So that is the primary way of consuming content on Facebook. And there are a variety of other things on the page that users might need, like their friends, that you can see their communities, etc. But that core scrolling feed is like right in the middle, and you can just scroll forever. And that is like the core content on Facebook. So you want to consider things like this. Now, if you see something like IMDb, you'll notice that when you load in the first page, like you see the core content is this central like video player that suggests to you probably one of the most popular shows or like the hottest shows right now, and that is the core content. But you can also see there are a couple side elements that are also pretty important, like the search bar is in white, whereas the rest of the website is in black. So it's very obvious that users may want to come here to search a specific show or a specific movie. And there are some other suggestions and recommended if they think that people would want to watch other shows that are related. And then the rest of it is, if you try to scroll down, maybe you're thinking of exploring the page a little bit, and it just gives you more recommended things. So this is kind of how you should try to engineer the flow of your website, just through a couple of examples. All right, next segment is about intuitive use and control. So this is, this is questions like, do buttons make sense to click? Is it obvious that you should click them, or how should you interact with the website itself? Like, if you see something like this, it's funny for about 30 seconds, and then you realize you can't actually do anything because you can't input the right number, right? So you want to make sure that all of your inputs make sense in the context of what you're trying to get, the information you're trying to get. Like a phone number should be like a field you can type in, maybe. Or if there's like 3 options, maybe you have a drop-down list, etc. Maybe if there's only 2 options, you might have like a toggle or something like that. but you want to have your inputs make sense for the kind of input you're looking for. Now let's talk about responsiveness. So this is pretty closely tied in with the idea of control. And so it's mainly just the question of, do users feel like they can actually interact with the website? Like, does the website, when a user does something, does the website respond to them? So something like, styling hover and click, which like you might have seen on your Chrome tabs. Like if you hover over your Chrome tab, it'll actually show a little card and it'll change the color of that little tab thing on the top. I mean, these seem like very minor things, but they contribute so much to help the user know that, yes, the website knows what you're doing. I got you. I know what you're doing. Like, I know you're hovering over this tab. You don't have to worry that like your website is frozen or something. So stuff like this actually goes a really long way. And I think in general, for buttons and like certain fields and inputs, having a hover style and a click style are incredibly important to sort of to really sell that input, that button. All right, now another sort of side tangent to this is the JavaScript event loop and asynchronous functions, which we mentioned during the async lecture. But the main thing here is you don't want to make your computer just stall out forever by running a bunch of like long computations. And in order to do that, you just throw anything that takes a while into asynchronous functions so that your website still responds normally, right, when the user is trying to click things. So if you try to like download something, it's just going on in the background, and you can still scroll, you can click, you can do whatever. Okay, now let's talk about the next big area, which is robustness. So robustness is all about, can the user break the website, and how do we fix that? How do we make sure the website works smoothly? So if you imagine this is you're coding up your website, you finish it, you give it to a user. Now, who might the user look like? Maybe the user is like you. Turns out most of the time, this is not true. Now, maybe you think, oh, the user is some big brain MIT student who has finished and graduated in 2 years or something. But this is also generally not true either. What's most accurate actually is if the user looks like this. So the thing is users will just do stuff that you don't expect, and often that are not intended by the website. They'll just do random things. So if things can break, they almost certainly will break sooner or later. And so you want to think about this. So we've all seen stuff like this. I mean, I don't know who uses the Internet Explorer anymore, but you want to avoid situations where your website stops working. So I guess the main sort of idea here is bug fixing. Now, this is like a general idea that you probably heard thrown around a lot. But the core thing is you just want to make sure the website works as it's intended. And I made a quick animation of how to fix bugs. Okay, yeah. Your server, okay, so the main thing is your server or client should not crash or error constantly. This is pretty straightforward. It's obvious, right? But it turns out that crashing errors are actually very common, especially when you're in early stages of development, like you are probably right now. Yeah, you definitely don't want to see things like this happen when you're running your website. And the main thing that causes crashes to be exceptionally bad is that when your server crashes, you actually have to just restart the whole server, which means that no one can use your website in the meantime. And this is kind of a big problem. So if we want to fix this, what you want to think about is you want to try to crash the server by inputting whatever random inputs you can think of, by doing all kinds of just stuff that should not be done. But just do it anyway and try to see if it breaks your server or breaks your client. And then once you have sort of found these things, you should try to fix them. So you can imagine yourself like Wreck-It Ralph, beating down your website, trying to destroy it. And then once you're done, you become Fix-It Felix and build it back up, right? Make it stronger than before. All right. Yeah, so crashing is bad because you have to restart the server. So you're trying to avoid this at pretty much all costs. But there is sort of a hierarchy of how bad bugs should be. And crashing is obviously the worst one. And then there's big bugs, which are not crashing, but cause severe problems. And maybe a small bug, or maybe no bug. And this is also sort of priority that you should be trying to fix things in. So if you've made your website and, oh no, it doesn't work, you want to think about, okay, I think there's a bug here, there's a bug here, there's a bug here. And the sort of priority that you want to fix them in is something like this. All right, and yes, when it doesn't crash, these errors are still important and you should try to fix them if you have time. But if it's very minor and everything seems to be working smoothly, yeah, it's probably okay if you leave it around for a little while. All right, so how do we fix bugs? Well, if it depends on how much time you have and also sort of how much expertise you have and how much, and so like if it's the last day, right? It's 1 a.m., you're trying to turn in your website, maybe just a Band-Aid fix is okay. But if you have more time, you're a week away from the deadline, you want to set things up so similar errors don't happen in the future, you probably want to just rebuild the whole thing. All right. So a quick example on Messenger. So Messenger actually has a like button feature. Some of you may have used it, where you can just click on that button and it sends like a sort of thumbs up. You can also set it to other things, but the default is a thumbs up. It turns out that you can click this thing really, really fast over and over again, and it will just send a ton of these emojis. And Facebook does not like users spamming their things because they have to store them away and they don't want to overload their databases. So what they did originally was, if you spam click this button really fast, it still sends the messages, but then it shows this pop-up that says, warning, please slow down. You might be blocked from using this feature. And it turns out that this pop-up doesn't actually do anything, because if you click confirm, you can just keep doing it, and it won't actually make anyone stop. But it does incentivize users, or at least it scares users to stop doing it, which is part of what they want to do. I mean, the end goal is to have users stop doing it that much. And even if it doesn't do anything, this does accomplish its task, more or less. So this is kind of like a Band-Aid fix. Now you actually just can't send them at all. Like if you click it really, really fast on your phone, it will just only send like one every so often. It won't send all of them. And that's a more sort of systematic fix. Although if you actually look at something like this, you'll notice that if you use the sticker feature, you can still spam stickers. So they haven't really fixed the whole problem. So I guess the moral of the story here is you want to be thorough when you debug, right? If you have a bug somewhere and you fix it, you might consider, is there a way that something very similar could arise in other situations? And then you could use the same fix for both of them. So this is just a sort of quick example. All right, let's talk about handling edge cases. So this is like a sort of sub aspect of debugging, and one thing you might consider is bad internet connection, right? If your internet is bad, which I think a lot of people have unreliable internet, or occasionally have internet outages, or maybe they are on their phone, they left their house, their internet like temporarily like cut out. Well, what should happen? Do you want to disconnect the user automatically, or do you want to keep trying to reconnect? Do you want to resume what the user is doing when they get back? So these are all things you should try to consider and explicitly program into your website if you want it to work as smoothly as possible. What if you close a tab at random times? Like, you're on like page 2 of a form you're supposed to submit, and then you just exit. This happens pretty often, actually. Like you fill out halfway through a form, and you say, okay, I need to go get lunch and get back and come back. When you come back, you don't remember you're doing your form. You just like close it or something. Now what happens? Well, do you want to save the progress like as you're going? Do you want the user to have to restart the form? I mean, I know there are some websites out there or some forms out there that you might fill out halfway and then you accidentally close it, or it glitches or something, and you just can't go back. Like it just doesn't work anymore. You don't want that to happen, right? So generally for something like this, you might want to think about, okay, do you want to save our users' progress every time they submit one input? Maybe like they type in their phone number and it's just automatically saves in the background. Like they don't know. Or maybe it doesn't do that, and it stores all of it on the client. And then once the user clicks submit, it just saves all of them. These are all sort of design choices that you want to be making. All right, what if you open web pages that should only be accessed in certain ways? Now, this is also pretty common. If you have, let's say, a form, like again, and let's say you're on page 3 and you send it to your friend, like, hey, look, you should fill out this form too. And they open up and it's on page 3. Do you want them to redirect back to page 1? Do you want to redirect to a home page or something? So all these things are things that you might want to consider programming into your website. What happens if you leave the tab for too long and you get automatically logged out by like Google authentication? Well, maybe you want to consider things like this. What if you open multiple tabs of the same thing? Like you're playing a game, maybe, and you have like 3 tabs of the same game. What happens? So these are just like like some questions to get you started on thinking about how to handle like things that users might do. And there's obviously a lot more. So the general idea is you want to think of every way you can to break the app, and then you don't have to cover everything, but every way that you think of and cover is a way that users can't break it the next time they use it. So now let's talk about lag. Now, lag is a really important thing, and it's also very, very frustrating to work with. Now, I don't know if you played League of Legends, but something like this will probably make you quite unhappy if you're in a situation like this. Now, so how do we fix something like this? Well, it turns out you'll hear later today that you'll be deploying your websites on a server called Heroku. But Heroku is not actually that great, especially the free version that you will be using. It's not that powerful, like something like, it can't really run that many things. It's quite slow and it can't handle that many connections, but it will work like more or less. And so it makes it kind of hard to sort of just say, okay, we'll just get a bigger computer and run it faster, right? So we can't do that. But there are a couple of tricks that we can do to like make it run more smoothly. One is you want to minimize unnecessary computations. So if you have like a bunch of like calculations in a server, you want to think about, is this actually necessary? Or can I put it off until when I actually need it? So you want to do that. Another thing is communicating between the server and the client is usually very costly. It takes time. So you want to bundle your communication together into packages and send them over like together. So this reduces the number of times you have to communicate, and it just increases the efficiency. The client should try to do as much as it can without talking to the server at all. Like you think about two people working on a piece set. If I don't know a question, I might call up my friend and say, hey, like how do you do this question? But if you have to communicate in like Morse code, I probably would try to do as much as I can without talking to him, because it just takes so much work and so much time to talk to him. So it's kind of the same way. You want it to, since sort of communicating client to server takes orders of magnitude more time than just doing computations by yourself, the client should just do as much as it can without talking. But I mean, there are some things obviously you have to talk about, like accessing APIs or doing, accessing game logic, from Alex's lecture, etc. You can also have the server try to prune itself. So what does this mean? This is, if you have like sort of dead code or empty room, like just things that have been created on the server, you can periodically look through them or have a sort of function that looks through them periodically and clear them out, because you don't want these extra things taking up all of your server, computation. All right. Now, the last thing we'll talk about is the sort of feel of the game, or feel of the website, sorry. So in general, like if you ever, see something and you ever felt like, oh, this thing feels so satisfying to like look at or do or whatever, that's what you're trying to aim for. So, having just idle animations, particle effects, screen shake, colors, these are all like, they might seem like bonus things, but they make something so much more. And that's the main thing that you're looking for here. I mean, like if you have a homepage that looks like this, I would just sit there for like 10 minutes and look at it and just like play around with it. I mean, obviously you don't have to make anything this complicated, but even something, as simple as making the Pusheen wag its tail kind of makes just the website feel like a lot more like alive in a way. And this thing is only like 3 frames of animation too. Yeah, sound and music also comes in big here, which I've already sort of talked about. We don't have a lot of time for. And last thing I'll talk about is movement. So like if things are moving on your page, you want to think about how can I make that as fluid, as seamless as possible. So this applies mostly to games, but also to various other websites. If you have games, this next section will be pretty helpful, but there might be a couple other things that you'll pick up on if you aren't looking to try to make games. So when you have things moving, generally you want to follow a movement curve, unless you're specifically looking for a sort of robotic or like some bizarre motions. They should follow a curve like this, where when you press the button, it starts accelerating, and then it reaches a constant speed, and then you stop pressing the button, and then it decelerates. Now this is quite complex. You may not get around to implementing it, but if you actually notice, like most games that you might have played that involve like moving characters around actually does use movement curves like this. You just might not notice it. Now I'm talking about input buffers. Input buffers are also a really important thing in games or anything that requires a lot of inputs in quick succession. So, in a case like this, we have a character that's landing on the ground. If you click the button just a frame too early, you won't actually jump. But if you have an input buffer, you can remember, you sort of store in the last input the user has inputted, and then do it when it can be done. In this case, if you can buffer it for like a small amount of time, then the user might be able to click the jump button before they hit the ground, and it'll just automatically jump when they hit the ground. And this just makes it feel a lot nicer. It doesn't really make the game like more accurate in a sense. It makes it less accurate, quote unquote, but it feels more intuitive. It feels more natural for the user. Yeah, things like wall sliding. So if you have, a lot of games have walls that are very sticky, like you just run into them, you can't move. That's not how walls work in real life. If you try to run like diagonally into a wall, you can still just slide along it. So things like this are things that you might want to consider. All right, last couple things, focus. So what is the most important feature on your website? And can the user easily use or access it? Like if your website is a game, there should be a big play button or like something that leads into a play button, like right on the homepage. If your website is a service, you want to make sure that service is very easy to understand and accessible on the homepage. So you want to just let these sort of features shine, for your website. All right. One last thing, optimizing for different devices. So this is not required, but there is a most responsive UI award. So you might want to think about this if you're looking for that. There's a ways to style your website for different screen sizes. Positioning and things are different for different sizes of screens. On a computer, you might want to spread out more horizontally. On a phone, it should be a vertical scroll, for example. And there's ways of detecting the screen size and whatnot as well. Also, device inputs, for example, on your phone, your inputs are sliding or like sort of swiping, or maybe you have to click a button, but like on your computer, you have access to the keyboard. So to consider things like this, if you only have like the enter key as your only submit button, then it won't work on your phone because you don't have an enter key. So I guess the final remark is just, it's easier to enjoy the idea when the implementation is good. So we will be grading you on both your idea and your implementation. And if your implementation makes it hard to sort of use the website, it just takes away from the experience. It takes away from how the user should be trying to go about using the website. But yeah, and so this is just by no means a comprehensive list. This is just a couple of things to have you get, thinking about, sort of get started on. But it's a good place to sort of build upon. Yeah, and I guess like the last thing is just have fun. I think designing user interfaces and making it all work out really smoothly is one of the most rewarding parts of WebLab, actually. It's one of the most enjoyable things to have done. But yeah, I guess without further ado, we should probably get into the sponsor lecture.